Chapter 24. On the Run.
The disused platform led to stone steps. Evidenced by their wear at the center of each, they'd been there an era or more. Considerable foot traffic had been supported when the planet had held an atmosphere. The stones fitted precisely without mortar. Following the steps, they came to a vantage point with a low safety wall. Mortar used in the wall's construction indicated it had been built later. Across the desert terrain, landscape contours met the bottom of pointed peaked mountains. They rose on either side of the valley corridor. To one side of the valley, a lake reflected the surrounding mountains and purple sky. The expanse of water stretched to the horizon, winding its way between pointed peak bases.
Atmosphere seems to have been depleted fairly recently,
mouthed Venru. No sound was audible through her pressure suit helmet and the relatively airless habitat. While they picked up on her assertion mentally, Nebulon indicated a control panel under a flap on the left chest of his suit. They switched on the audio communication for her benefit. The reduced atmosphere proved insufficient to support much life on the sparse landscape. Air would increase slightly as they descended the mountain. There wasn't much time to marvel at the view, although it probably hadn't been seen for untold sun revolutions. They passed through a crumbling stone arch at the extremity of the vantage point. A stone path led between sand-colored stone columns, reaching up into the sky. They remained as monuments to a forgotten civilization. The path gave way to arid ground and a wasteland that had once supported vegetation. Remnants of sporadic green plants remained, which had somehow managed to evolve with virtually no air. Nebulon led the way, indicating the route to his craft in the near darkness. They walked at a steady pace to conserve energy. They needed to cover considerable ground before reaching the valley floor. Zentran's thoughts drifted to what he'd gained from the central computer and how best to enlighten the others. Perhaps they'd be better off not being informed, but they had a right to know. Even so, offloading it on his friends seemed indecent. Zack sensed Zentran's perplexity, but didn't inquire further. Only Venru remained unaware of Zentran's concern, but to her, his disquiet was attributed to their immediate situation. She recalled the turmoil in the Morning Sun Club on Delta 4B, which Zack and Zentran had dealt with. This situation was worse, and she knew the implications now. Knowing gave her a feeling of helplessness. The touch of Zack's hand on her shoulder reassured her. She felt his hand glide down the back of her pressure suit to her waist. Turning to face him, a broad smile was visible through his visor. The moment alleviated her feeling of inadequacy. Nebulon had his own misgivings, but having lived on the edge for so long, the threat of detection had become commonplace. Their present situation was the culmination of everything he'd previously encountered. The possibility of deprogramming had never been so real, and his daughter's presence concerned him. His life had been spent avoiding her involvement. He was pleased that she was with Zack. He was a fine young man, and his abilities would certainly help now. Nebulon's disquiet at the ease with which Zentran had penetrated his shield was put aside. It was clear that his power could be counted on in a conflict. Zentran thought about Fora. Her strength could be a deciding factor with the odds stacked against them. But if they were to go down, he preferred her not being there. He and Zack would have to be enough. It was darker now, and the only light afforded them was the stars and the moon rising in the sky. He inspected the terrain far ahead. Lookalikes weren't evident, but they still had a long way to go before reaching Nebulon Star Cruiser. Not far from where the cruiser stood, ruins of an ancient town intruded into the desert's serenity. Near the ruins, an opening at the base of a hill led to the modern but degenerated civilization below via a disused mine shaft. As in so many instances, technological advancement in a material world had replaced the true essence of people. Spirituality had been reduced to denial. It was hard to conceive of people becoming any worse. Zentran now knew it could, and to degrees he wished weren't possible. Sweat ran down Nebulon's face inside his visor. A thoughtful Zentran followed down the dark slope. Bringing up the rear, Zack noticed the exertion taking its toll on the older man. He also felt Venru's concern for her father. Zack was first to break the silence.
Let's stop to rest for a while.
Came via the suit's communication system.
No, let's carry on.
Insisted Nebulon, knowing the request was on his account. Later, as their journey seemed to continue endlessly, the older man slowed. He wondered, as did the others, how long it would take lookalikes to give chase. Tenacity and strength of character kept Venru's smaller frame going. She was determined not to show any weakness to the men. In the Skylift control room, technicians worked in frenzy to replace the burnt motor and circuitry. Priority Council orders had seen to the arrival of new parts. Outside the control room, 4 regiments of synthetic troopers stood in formation with laser blasters and magnetic webs. Occupants of other skylifts, still trapped on the motionless lift system, were past being angry. They sat shaking, trying to control their fears. The prolonged delay with uncertain outcome had reduced some to tears. Others sat as motionless as the lifts, in uncaring apathy. Personnel and tourists had been cleared from the Skylift entry hall, while the programmed troopers waited. The door leading to the control room burst open, breaking the silence. A laser-blasted technician was carried out. Unconvinced by problems causing delays, a special mission lookalike used the example to threaten remaining technicians for faster results. Fear and more feverish work produced even less efficiency. In the silence of the Skylift entry hall, the motionless regiments heard a resounding click as electronics and electrical machinery came to life. Just as suddenly, the sound died. Inside the control room, a technician was confronted by a blaster. The click that followed was not from the blaster, but from the machinery re-energizing in an attempt to overcome the overload of starting with fully loaded lifts. A technician disengaged the drive mechanism, allowing the motors to gain momentum. He was confronted by the lookalike's penetrating stare. Its only concern was stationary lifts. Engaging the motor drive a little too early for the load on the system, the technician cringed as the motors stuttered. Miraculously, they didn't stall again, but gradually picked up speed to an equilibrium with the drive mechanism. The lookalike left the control room too erectly to take command in the entry hall. As the first lift arriving back decreased speed and halted on the platform, the lift door opened automatically. Disgruntled occupants, now a bit more composed, expecting some type of apology, received none. Instead, they were greeted by trooper regiments with weapons trained. A show of force of this magnitude, precise and coldly efficient, was in a way impressive, but to those on the receiving end was a terrifying experience. They were ushered unceremoniously to a sealed-off section in the building, commandeered for interrogation. No slightest protest or resistance was tolerated. The Special Mission Commander looked on with neither interest nor disinterest as lift after lift was cleared. The empty lift arrived back. There was still no visible reaction from the look-alike, even though it understood the significance of missing occupants. It turned around and walked in its erect manner to the interrogation area. Microwave communication circuitry in its processor activated two-way data streams, interacting with the bodiless central mainframe terminal on Delta 4B. Sitting at her council communications panel, a planet away, Fora had never seen anything like the degree of traffic flow, even greater than after their ordeal at the Morning Sun Club. Previously unused coded messages with interplanetary priority symbols self-routed through her communication system. The rising sun brought a new morning to the 4 fugitives who were bathed in sweat, resting in the shade of an overhanging rock. It jutted out from an outcrop at the base of the mountain, protecting them from the blinding rays of the planet's celestial orb. 2 police interceptors appeared over the horizon, shining silver against the bright purple sky. Dropping into the valley corridor, they were lost to view. An instant later they appeared in a flash of speed through the valley corridor in front of them. They streaked over the small group, taking refuge under the overhang, and continued over the town ruins to the lake beyond. The hills to the side of the lake momentarily concealed them before they rose sharply to circle and make a return run. They'd been spotted, as the overhang offered little concealment. Both interceptors had real pilots. Seated behind them, lookalikes sent and received microwave data. The interceptors approached them directly. Laser blasts from both craft left 2 lines of scorched ground on either side of them. It was intended to frighten them. They were wanted alive. Leaving his body, Zentran entered the cockpit of the leading interceptor. The pilot had been picked for his accuracy and reflex speed, but had low-level mental activity. Zentran turned his attention to the look-alike. He understood this electronic pseudo-person now. The Council's central computer had revealed to him everything he needed to know. The interceptors rose once more to circle. Having confirmed the fugitive's position, magnetic holding webs were ready to paralyze them. Nebulon placed an arm around his daughter to comfort her. Venru was glad of it. She glanced around in vain for a better place for them to take refuge. This was not a time to despair. If she was to die, or be captured that day, at least she'd come to know her father. Also, Zack was with her. Their friend Zentran was an honorable man to die with. She wondered about her mother. Was she to die and never know anything about her? Life to Zack was of little consequence, something he almost sneered at. He'd often wondered, when the time came for him to die, would he be able to carry his abilities with him into his next life? Would he be able to remember? He couldn't remember his past lives, but Zentran could. These thoughts flashed through his mind. Knowing Venru's thoughts as well, anger overcame him. That took Zentran by surprise. Zentran felt the magnitude of Zack's energy, forcing the leading interceptor on a crash course into the valley floor in front of them. There was no time to reason with Zack, and he wondered if he'd be able to counter Zack's energy. Zack had been inherently more powerful, but Zentran had worked harder at developing his mental abilities. He hoped it had been hard enough. Zack felt Zentran's hand on his shoulder, as well as Zentran's energy resisting his intention to crash the interceptors. Zack released his grip on them, and the interceptors lurched upwards, out of control.
Why, Zen?
Now was not the right time to tell him.
Trust me, Zack. I will tell you. I promise.
Together, they forced the interceptors into space. The two friends looked at each other and laughed. It relieved the tension. Zack's anger had dissipated now, and he tried once again to understand Zentran's senseless concern for the enemy. The lookalike commander's expression at the Skylift Control Center still didn't change, even though it had no way to compute the amount of force it had just monitored. It was beyond his senses' range. Besides this, there was no data with which to formulate a battle plan. Microwave communication with the interceptors had ceased. The lack of information had brought the whole system to a standstill. It had never had so little data. The morning's advance brought an ever-increasing heat to the surface of the planet. Insulated by their pressure suit's protective shielding, the four continued their hasty advance on Nebulon's space cruiser. Zentran had returned to his body. With the interceptors in near space, he'd severed the links in the lookalike co-pilot's microwave communication circuitry. Data he'd acquired from the central computer had served its first useful purpose. The synthetic men and their pilots were now free to decide on any course of action they chose in pursuing their own destiny. They noticed their freedom with surprise. Under their own volition, the lookalikes with their pilots set course well away from Delta 5. The interceptors banked and disappeared into the depths of space. Cool air would be a welcome relief to Zack's perspiration-soaked body inside his pressure suit. He could see Nebulon now really taking strain, as well as Venru to a lesser extent. He wondered about Zentran's misplaced sympathy for lookalikes. The difference in their personalities had never included secrets. Now Zentran was withholding the stars above, or creation knows what, from him. Yes, he was a little irritated. A very weary Nebulon forced stride after stride to trudge the remaining distance to his craft. He thought about his daughter. She'd grown from a pretty and good-looking little girl to a warm and beautiful woman. Having been deprived of knowing her for so long, he would do everything in his power not to fail her now. Thoughts of her father came to Venru as well, as she followed his relentless strides, leading them to safety. Zentran's quiet moods were unnerving, but she was glad he was there. Zack bringing up the rear was her invincible warrior. In the thick of a fight, he could be relied on. She too had to force her body to comply. Wet with sweat, her olive body had no dry place anywhere. She longed to be inside the cruiser, where she could get out of the pressure suit. They were in plain sight of the spacecraft now. Its silver lines shimmered in the scorching sun. Also in plain sight, an army of troopers on the run, made to cut them off. More poured from the town ruins and disused mineshaft tunnel in endless streams. The 4 fugitives broke into a weary run. Zentran tried to slow the troopers down. He knew that Zack would start destroying them soon. There were too many of them to influence mentally. Their combined energy, directed by microwave control, would not be possible to override. Any trace of weariness vanished as Zentran ran, leaving Zack to pace it out with Venru and Nebulon. He reached the cruiser with the troopers far too close. The ramp took hardly a stride and a half before he opened the hatch. With the drives fired up, he returned to the hatch to help the others on board. Venru was about 10 paces away, with her father close behind, putting everything into the run. Bringing up the rear, Zack was amongst the leading troopers as they fell in molten disarray about him. His energy sliced through their circuitry and synthetic bodies like a laser. Zentran held back the approaching horde with every measure of his force. He found himself gritting his teeth with effort. Then there was some mighty assistance. He could feel it swaying the tide. Once again, the entity had come to his rescue. Pure non-material power flowed from him through Zentran as if they were one. The mass of troopers slowed. Rushing back to the controls, Zentran lifted the craft slowly off the ground as the 3 ran up the ramp. Zack, the last inside, held the hatch open for a while as he watched the foiled trooper army disappear into the distance. As Zentran accelerated the craft's ascension through the meager atmosphere, Zack smiled.